People are getting live now. So Emily is the author of DevOps for Dummies. I don't know if you read that book. I did a while back when I got into the DevOps world. And then I also recently read the 97 things every cloud engineer should know. I actually copied a few things for one of my notes in there too. So that was awesome work as well. And you recently announced a new SDLC cycle as well. I'll put the link for that too shortly in the chat so everyone can read. You're redefining, DevOps these days, and you work at Amazon as well, right?
I do.
So I don't know how you manage, and I think you were speaking at 20 conferences. You were telling me in the last.
It's a lot. I October especially. It was like everyone came back online. So we've, it's been a trickle here and there with virtual events over the last year and a half. But this October, I think, has been nuts. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But I'm excited because, you mentioned the SDLC, and my whole approach with this is that I'm one person. I can speak about the things I've seen and the areas that I'm familiar with, but I need everyone to contribute to this. This is a community effort. And I know the link I gave you, it's up on GitHub. So I want people to take it, make it their own. And we can dive into all the elements. But I was just on a call yesterday about someone who's going to change part of it for a survey they're doing. And I'm just really excited about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're excited too. So I guess taking a step back, how do you define DevOps? I'm sure if I asked people in chat, I would love to know how people define DevOps in 5 words, but how would you define DevOps?
Oh my gosh, that would be fascinating. I would love to see what people actually say in chat. So I would love to hear how other people define it. I'm always sort of commenting that, DevOps is 12, 13 years old at this point, which is unbelievable to me. Like I literally cannot believe it. But it's become this catch-all term, and it means different things to different people. And so from an official standpoint, my definition of DevOps is really an engineering culture of collaboration, ownership, and learning for the purpose of accelerating the software development lifecycle from ideation to production. Again, that SDLC makes an appearance. But yeah, I mean, for some people, DevOps is much more about, CI/CD. They're almost synonymous for some folks. Other times it's deploying more frequently. It could be different approaches to testing or security, so there's a lot of different derivatives that have snaked off of it.
Absolutely. So I just put in the chat as well. So for all the people who are attending live, so we would love to know how do you define DevOps too?
Yeah, very
right.
Cool.
So it's definitely good to have some authority around it as well. So how's it changing and evolving? Tell us about why is DevOps changing? I just caught up to the concept of DevOps. Now it's changing. Now you have another SDLC life cycle as well. So why the change, right? And how is it evolving?
Yeah, it's kind of. That's tech though, right? I mean, as soon as we sort of get our hands around something, then it all shifts. And we're constantly moving and iterating and evolving. And that really is at the center of DevOps, right? It is this continuous innovation, continuous learning approach to software development. But I think for me, over the last year or two, I've been thinking about what's next for DevOps. And if you look at the sort of timeline of this, Agile came out around 2000, DevOps came out around 2010. These are not specific dates, but they're close enough. And now we find ourselves in 2021, I think. I don't know what time it is anymore, but I believe that's the year. And with that, we really need to think about, okay, we have established DevOps as sort of a default. It's table stakes at this point for most teams. That doesn't mean it's ubiquitous. And if you are still working on that, you are okay. You're not too late. It's fine. But the early adopters, even the late adopters are really there. And so it's time to start thinking about what's next. And for me, cloud native, I believe, is the next default development decisions. And the cloud native story is not one that the DevOps story can absorb, not in its current form. And that's sort of what I'm thinking about right now is how do you kind of create the principles of DevOps and transfer them into this completely different ecosystem that is distributed and incredibly complex and has all these elements that are the defaults of cloud native, but didn't exist when DevOps came into being.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think, because the theme is governance as code, what do you think about where does governance fit into this? And what do you think as a developer at heart, right? What do you think when you think of governance?
So I'm going to be real honest. That's what I think of when I think of governance. It's like developer, as you're developing, right? Your job is to keep things moving. It's to write new features. It's to keep the application not only running, but improving over time, at least in theory. Governance feels like a blocker. And it could be because that's how it typically in the past has been presented. So I'm excited about this talk and certainly what y'all are working on. But I think that governance, whether you're talking about security or cost concerns or compliance, I think of lawyers in suits. I think of major problems and incidents that I don't want to be at the center of. And I think of, not feeling like I know what I'm doing, to be honest. When it comes to things like security and compliance and cost is scary. My job as a developer is just to spend money, not think about it, right? That's so, I think anytime you're making governance more approachable, easier and a smoother process, you're going to be a winner for developers. What's your experience been?
So I think traditionally, governance has that image at times, right? Even though it's necessarily,
yes,
you have to be secure, you have to be compliant. The organizations don't have unlimited money to burn in the cloud, right? So definitely, but I think in a DevOps world, it definitely needs to change. And you said it right? As a developer, you're not supposed to fear it. And we had earlier in the day a conversation with the CISO of HBO Max as well. He talked about how his security team should be thinking about fears, right? Fear of misconfiguration, fear of security, and eliminate these fears out of their development teams, right? So he talks about how governance should be more guardrails versus something that people are afraid of, right?
Yes.
And I really like the way he used the word fear a lot because, you're right. That's what you said as well. Developers traditionally tend to fear governance, but at the same time, it's pretty important. But when you live in a DevOps world where developers want to go fast, operation wants to run anything as code, it makes sense to shift governance as code as well. What do you think about the concept? Like, how would you define governance as code as well?
This is definitely not my area of expertise, so I'd love to hear what y'all's official stance on this is. But I think for me, coming into it, governance as code is really about obfuscating governance for developers. It's standardizing it. It's making it, self-documented, approachable. You have those guardrails in place. And it's something that I can go find for myself in a repo rather than, having to knock on someone's door or try and figure out something from 5-year-old documentation, which is, not ideal. So I think really the governance as code is kind of removing that overhead and stress from the developer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Harsha mentioned as well, like it's ought to be in the background. It should be. Yeah. It should be letting you do things at your pace, right? And really the concept of governance code and custodian as well, as we'll talk in a bit, is all about that you have these simple policies that even your developers can write, maintain, works the way their coding cycle runs, deployed through GitOps and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really important in a DevOps world, right? And so in terms of your SDL cycle, where do you think governance fits in there? And how important it is, and at what stage people should think about it for that.
Yeah, I've been joking that I've put it under securability. So for folks who haven't seen it, this new model is really 5 concentric circles that describe the roles of software development. These are not personas, which we have traditionally used. And I think the reason is personas are immutable. I'm a developer. I'll always identify as a developer. But I might be creating work that is requiring me to step into the role of an operator or some kind of automation engineer. And so our day-to-day roles are better represented, I think, in this model. And then it's interrupted by 6 considerations or spokes. So it's testability, securability, reliability, observability, flexibility, and then scalability. And I've been joking that I put compliance and governance in securability because all the things that require lawyers should live together. But it's tough. And this goes into some of the background thinking is when I was thinking about this and inventing this. There are so many considerations that we have to think about throughout the process that if we listed them all out, this model will be incredibly overwhelming. Like you would look at it and want to cry. And despite governance probably earning its own spoke, I do think we have to keep it simple as a way of in some way obfuscating the intense complexity of our work into a model that really helps us think about it. But yeah, I think securability is where it stands. I think that's sort of the default that people can latch onto a little bit more comfortably.
Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely you've been getting a lot of coverage. I've seen a lot of vendors starting aligning their tool sets to this.
It's awesome.
This as well. You've been tweeting, being tagged everywhere. So it was pretty interesting to see where, how we aligned as well with Cloud Custodian as a community, where we understand that, like you mentioned, that personas are changing, right? Everyone takes different roles, right? And governance, the developer is something they don't want to touch. They see it as a manual process, something that cannot be automated, something that's going to stop them, right? For sure. So I think making governance more approachable to developers through governance as code makes sense, right? So they can understand those policies, they can manage those policies. They don't have to worry about governance as well. They don't have to go through that. And that's what the Cloud Custodian project is based on as well, that you use these simple YAML-based policies that run as Lambda files and are automatically detecting, enforcing for you. And they're really, really like, even myself who's not a big security geek, I can understand a security policy or a compliance policy. It's pretty simple to get.
I want to dig into that. Like, how does that work? If I would think about the difference between an SLA, a service level agreement, versus an SLO, a service level objective, where as a developer or any kind of engineer, I'm going to think more about the SLO, whereas the lawyers and business folks, they're going to think about the SLA. Where's that delta between the more complex, written by someone with a law degree policy versus this sort of simple, approachable policy? How does that work?
I think it's all about collaboration, right? So if you have a common language that both the groups can understand, especially you talk about collaboration in the DevOps world or DevSecOps world as well. So I think if it's a language that developers understand and the compliance side of the house can understand as well, so they're easily able to collaborate on policies as well. And you'll see later on in the day, there are a lot of organizations that are actually crowdsourcing policies from their development teams. They come into central security team and they make sure they are against certain rules. They manage those policy repos at times centrally, but developers are contributing to those as well. And as part of the process, again, it really comes to that simple language that people can communicate across each other. Of course, a developer cannot be a compliance expert, right? But I think collaboration is a big part. And that's why, we thought, talking about DevOps and governance as code would be a big fit because the theme is around collaboration, right? And that's one of the key challenges that we see as well, that, collaborating across, security, dev, and ops, because they're standard brackets, is harder. But imagine across compliance, across, these FinOps groups, right?
Yes.
There's another buzzword here. So FinOps groups, our development team has to deal with all of these. How do you make sure everyone has a policy? That how does it get implemented without getting in the way of the developer?
Yes. Yeah. And it's a tough balance. No, I think it aligns really well because I keep thinking of DevSecOps. This was this first spinoff or derivative of DevOps. And the purpose was to move security left. And by that, I don't mean that security was something you had to do at the start and then never think about it again. It was really thinking about things earlier on in the process, making security part of the architecture or design conversations that you would have with your team. And I think this is a similar situation where, no, you're not going to be a compliance or governance expert, But having those sort of T-shaped skills where you're a generalist in a lot of things and a specialist in one area, and having some understanding and appreciation for the areas of expertise that belong to other people, I think is really beneficial to the team.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have a few more questions for you, Emily, but I do want to give a second to everyone. There is a bit of a delay at times in Hopin, the moment you send a question and the moment we see it. So I definitely want to give the audience some time to start putting in their question either in the chat window or in the Q&A as well. This time we'll keep moderating and making sure they're not in the queue at least. But feel free to put them in the chat as well. So if other folks want to chime in on a conversation, they can. So Emily, have you explored the Cloud Custodian project yet? Any thoughts around that?
I've just started looking into it. I think it's really interesting. I'm sure you all have talked about it a lot today. I'd be curious to hear how other people are using it. Like, how is this being implemented through the industry?
I think pretty much everyone in the industry, even if you look at it today, of course, in financial services, it's a lot hard to find organizations to talk about it openly. But I think today you will see HBO Max, which is streaming media. Right after in a bit, we'll have JPMC as well. So they're using it at scale as well. We have companies that we use every day, like Zapier, my personal favorite. Being in marketing, Zapier is pretty awesome to have. So we had a presenter from there, and we have 300 plus contributors now. So officially, if you look at it from an open source standpoint, that's a great stat to have. Be a part of CNCF, of course. But I think there are different use cases. If it's the security team, they're starting off with some security use cases. Sometimes the operations team, they're looking at security policies too, but there are a lot of operational cost policies too that they can really enforce, right? So it's not that you only are getting red light, green lights. You also are taking actions on them and making the life of a developer a lot easier. And then now there's a lot of FinOps use cases. There's a FinOps foundation now. I don't know how that fits into DevOps or this SDL cycle as well, but you talk about cost and FinOps a lot as well. I don't know if anyone is going to combine all these terms, Dev, Sec, Ops, Fin into I don't know.
Oh my gosh, I tweeted about it a bit ago because I was trying to make a map. And it was for some folks who were getting confused. And I was like, well, I started to explain it. And then I'm confusing myself as I'm explaining this. Because there's so many of these. I call them the blank ops. We have the FinOps. We have the AI ops. We have the ML ops. Because why not have both? We have, dev data ops, just data ops. It's getting a little crazy or wild. I'm trying to eliminate that word from my vocabulary. But it's really, overwhelming. And so I made this sort of map on how they overlapped. I put it up on Twitter. But it's too much to think about. And for me, one of the inspirations for creating this next version of DevOps and this sort of new approach to the SDLC is creating a holistic view of it again. I think what was really unique about DevOps and compelling was that it looked at the whole picture from start to finish and everywhere in between and every loop back. DevOps really looked at the entire process of software development. None of those derivatives have. They all sort of take a segment of it, and there's value in that for sure. But I think the holistic view is where you really start to see things, especially in a complex system. You start to see patterns instead of anomalies.
Yeah, absolutely. I know George is saying MLSecOps.
MLSecOps. Don't you put that in the universe, George. Don't you do that. I see Liz has a question.
Yeah.
What are some other ways DevOps can collaborate with other teams? What do you think the greatest challenge or source of friction is? It's a good question. I think the source of friction is always going to be humans. We're problematic. I think our tech is so much easier than us. And I think about this a lot because it's not just that everyone, there is no big T truth, as I like to say, in life. There's, none of us actually know what the truth or what the, quote unquote reality of a situation is. We all have our different impressions. And it's fascinating to me that two people can walk through the exact same situation and step away with radically different viewpoints and perspectives of what happened, how they felt, what comes next, what other people should do or shouldn't do. And so anytime you have a bunch of humans working together, you're going to have failures in communication, hurt feelings just from the way we sort of communicate or think about things, or assumptions. We all have knowledge bias based on our experience and our education and our viewpoint. And so we lose the ability to really kind of define the vocabulary we're using with each other and then step through it. And I like to call this IaaS, idiot as a service. But I think asking the dumb questions is incredibly valuable, because when I think about abstraction, like earlier today, a video of me played at GitOpsCon, and it was, thinking about the word abstraction. We use this all the time, ad nauseum in tech. It's become this default in our vocabulary, but what does it mean? Has anyone ever sat down and this is what I mean by abstraction? We don't. And so I think really kind of saying that is the important part, like communicating and getting that as down pat as possible is really, really important. So friction is always going to be that. Any team, you're always going to have people who don't gel. That's okay. We all have people we don't like. There's always people that don't like us. That's all right. But having respect, I think, is really, really critical to a team. And then, for our own contribution, accountability. And I use accountability over responsibility, because for me, responsibility is about having a duty to respond or handle a situation. And instead, accountability is really the capability for someone to account for their actions, to say, yes, maybe I messed up or maybe I chose wrong, but this is why I made this decision. And this is the steps that I took. And this is what I've learned. And I think that is a much more powerful statement and exercise for any team.
Yeah, and over time, you can automate that as policies.
Feelings as a service. It's coming soon. I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. So a quick question. What advice would you give to organizations and people who tend to make jobs out of terms like DevOps? How do we shift the conversation about culture instead of job titles?
I think we've lost that battle. I think at this point, resume-driven development won, and we should just accept where we are. Yes, DevOps in its original purpose and, true thoughts as far across the industry, it's not a job. It's a philosophy. It's a methodology. You don't have, but you do. Like, it happened with Agile too, right? We didn't, you can't be an Agile engineer, but you can sorta. You have Scrum Masters and these things that come off of it. I think DevOps, because it has become such a ubiquitous term, of course, there's going to be jobs around it. I've seen it, be, if it's not an operations engineer or, a platform engineer is very popular right now. SRE, obviously, site reliability engineer. But DevOps engineer, I think it's just, it's what happened. And if you can get 10, 20 extra thousand because of that title, go for it. Get paid, y'all. But yeah, we lost that battle.
Yeah, no, great question. So on the same thing, do you think the responsibility of governance, something like governance, lies in the future with an SRE or with platform teams, or it seems like everything is going to an SRE?
SRE is trying to capture the world. And in some ways it works, but again, it's this term that different people would describe differently, right? You have the Googly version, the original version, that's a little bit more focused on, hey, these are people who spend roughly 50% of their time reacting to things and 50% of their time being essentially developers and creating automation and processes around reducing toil, or those manual processes that we do repetitively. So there's that. There's people who it's synonymous with something like a DevOps engineer or a platform engineer. For governance, for me, I think the trick with this is the word itself, because governance as a word makes me nervous. Like my feeling is that if I go into governance and I own governance and then something goes wrong, I get fired. And that's what's really scary about it, right? And so you have to have this, true DevOps culture where failure is acceptable. Failure is expected. Failure is practiced. And failure is really responded to with calm learning mindset, right? This isn't a blame game. But that's really, really hard. We can say that until we're blue in the face, but humans, our instincts, I mean, the older parts of our brain are designed to survive. And if part of that is throwing someone else under the proverbial bus, we're going to do it. So it's, it's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like I said, another word like ownership, Harsha mentioned, could be a good one. Yeah, absolutely. I think, but I think definitely the world is changing. Roles are changing. Everything is shifting as a code.
Yep.
And, it's all about velocity. Of course, you have to
Yes.
think about, continuous compliance, continuous security, and all that kind of stuff. But, definitely everything is changing. And, we would love as a community to work with you and see how we can, fit into governance as code into this model as well within security. I see maybe in a couple other places too. But yeah, this is, I think I've seen tremendous articles on it. I hope everyone enjoyed this talk as well, and they tweet out this SDLC later today or tomorrow as well, or read it or share it with their DevOps teams, because I did see a lot of DevOps titles as well within the attendees. So again, Emily, thank you so much for your time. I know you're super busy, and we'll love for you to join time to time the custodian community.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate all your questions and kind words.
Great. Thank you.